Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Big Boys Table Talk Show Podcast with Pronago and IskatuMesk. I'm Pronago, and he's IskatuMesk.
Hi.
Today, we're going to be talking about marketing. And,
Can't say I know Mark too well. Isn't he like playing with his dangalang, or is that someone else?
No, that's someone else. Playing with his dangling is Dick Suck, Mark's father.
Oh, I see.
Anyways, we touched on this briefly in the first episode, actually, where we discussed gamer psychology. And while trying to figure out how we could manage to explain gamer psychology in a way that didn't completely confuse everybody, we also touched upon the fact that obviously a lot of psychology and a lot of investment goes into marketing. And for sure, there's a big element of how would you even say it? There's a big element of basically like the majority of the developers' money will be going towards marketing as opposed to the actual game, even though that money is hashed out for a particular that's the money for the game's development, and yet most of it goes to, or at least a good portion of it in most cases goes to things like marketing, things like advertisements and spots on YouTube videos and wherever else people advertise, I guess on the side of Facebook or something. So
Think about the average Steam game. It costs $100 to put a game on Steam. They put maybe $5 into the development, and then the rest of it goes into having someone like Snoop Dogg plug your game on Twitch.
yeah.
Where chances are it's not even him even playing it.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised about that whole Drake thing that happened, where a popular rapper decided to, a hip-hop artist decided to play a game called Fortnite. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all.
It is Epic's microtransaction engine, I believe.
Yes, so it's similar to, well, I guess it's designed to be one of those games that people play. Like, it's weird. This is a development that I feel like is pretty recent, actually. The home game. Like, a lot of people play League as their home game. Or, I guess World of Warcraft was probably the OG home game. These games that people play, basically ad infinitum. At least for a good portion of their time, a good portion of their life. So you get positions like people who are starting to play Fortnite or PUBG, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. All these people who are trying to figure out where their new home game is going to be, and a lot of these people play multiple games, but will generally come back to a single one that sticks with them, which is probably why you have the prevalence of, as you've called them, whales, where they spend a lot of money on microtransactions and really try to unlock all of the cosmetic stuff. So
Microtransactions compound the issue too. That plays into the marketing and psychology. It's all basically the same circle jerk.
right. So the main focus of talking about marketing, I guess, is sort of intrinsically linked to gaming psychology, right? The idea that you're going to be trying to tap into some psychological element of a gamer and figure out if you can have them involved in any way so that you can grab them and have them make your game their home game. And I think the reason why we see so many massively multiplayer attempts now, with Fortnite and PUBG being the most recent sort of like big names to it, that's probably a big reason why a lot of people a lot of developers are now trying to get stuff done in that regard and trying to make multiplayer games.
Well, it's just people see something was successful and they want to ride the waves of success. PUBG comes off of DayZ. That was a tremendous failure and made fun of, and someone's like, hey, I can make something like that using the Arma engine, and there you have it, PUBG. PUBG is a goddamn disaster, but it's PUBG, and it picked up because Twitch does all of its marketing, so there was no real investment on that at all. And pretty much nobody I've seen who plays PUBG will tell me it's a good game. They play it just because they really have nothing else to do. I mean, it's the same argument we made for World of Warcraft and other MMOs. And then people are like, oh shit, PUBG is successful. And look how lazy it is. We can be successful too. but it kind of doesn't really work like that, which is why you had so many MMOs that people thought would be WoW killers, and they all universally failed.
Right. Well, there's a big like, I guess the heart of the matter comes from the fact that so many games are trying to overtake other games, and it goes back to the idea that there are people. It's because there are people who will pay a lot of money for cosmetic elements of your game. It's strange though, because obviously marketing has existed in several different forms for a long time, and for single player games or for games whose multiplayer was far less, I guess, had far less staying power, potential staying power.
The main thing today, the main strategy today, is to bloat out grind time so that you can't issue a refund on Steam, which I think is about 2 hours. So you had a pile of trash released recently that was called Hunt Down the Freeman or something like that.
Oh yeah.
And it is literally like the oh fucking it is the essence of marketing, because it's Freeman, so it's related to Half-Life, and everybody wants Half-Life 3, but they're not going to get it because Valve realizes they don't make money making games, they make money selling other people's games, and hats. So they're like, hey, we can ride off of this. So one guy spends maybe like a weekend slapping things together in Source, I guess, makes a huge colossal disaster, but he knows that, people are not going to like this when they realize that I'm just grabbing for money. But the way I can make sure that I keep onto my money is ensuring that it takes you a couple hours to actually find out how terrible everything is. So I had like these long ice levels that are just many, many minutes of just walking back and forth and emptying nothing to pad out your playtime, so you can't issue a refund on Steam, because you can't issue a refund if you've played a certain amount of hours or something. And I was watching Penguin Zero, It's Critical or something like that, playing through this on a stream. And it got to the point where he was just using no clip and using find console command that revealed trigger volumes and stuff like that, and was just finding those. And he just wanted to see the cinematics. And even despite the fact you're flying through the level and no clipping through everything and god moding through everything, it still took an absolutely extraordinary amount of time to go through some of the levels just because of how they had been designed that way. So the thing about games like, Hunt Down the Freeman or MOBAs, as I believe it's pronounced, phone games, for example, World of Warcraft, etc., is to get you hooked into something that has an investment and trigger the buyer's remorse response, as it's called, as we call it anyways. It's probably a more academic term for it, but the whole thing is that you feel obligated to go through something because you've put it in an investment. So if you can't refund it on Steam, then, not only does the developer already have your money and you can't really do anything with it whatsoever, but the whole idea of stuff like World of Warcraft and stuff, is the daily quests and stuff like that, all plays into the marketing. It's all sort of similar things. And marketing is so big that, to cover all of the points of marketing, to really get in depth in it, you would need to put in probably hundreds of podcasts, because there's reasons why there's many different kinds of like university courses and stuff like that to really get into like designing the marketing behind something. But the effects of marketing and the way you expose them within the traditional game, especially in the West, but just pretty much everyone for that matter, they're all very, very like layman. You can see them pretty much everywhere. I believe we discussed ceremonies and stuff for opening loot boxes and stuff that comes into it. Someone described that to me as a adrenaline addiction, similar to gambling or like sports or stuff like that. And obviously the people who are buying loot boxes and stuff like that generally are not intelligent enough to handle gambling, but they can do so within the comfort of their own home using their dad's credit card number. So that's where it comes in, is apparently like the whales especially. I actually talked to someone, I know someone who has spent over $1,000 at a time playing something called there was Fate Grand Order, and then there was Grand Blue Fantasy, but she'd also played several other games. And as far as I know, she'd never worked, but she lives in a fairly rich family. She sometimes gets gifts from her parents, like her mother would gave her a gold coin or something from a conference that she had come from. The coin was worth over $900, and she games the stock market actually. So she's pretty smart. She's pretty smart and quite capable. And but all the money goes into gambling for 2D images, basically waifus, in phone games. And one of these days, I gotta sit these people down and ask them, like, why do you do this? Why do you do this? Because they share this information freely. Like, there's not like a single real, like, I guess there's like some kind of regret that, oh, I spent like $900 on this, but there's not really like a real sense of embarrassment. Like, these people actually try to defend these things in some cases, and I find that absolutely insane. When basically it's like a handful of these individuals who try to come up with excuses to justify paying these absurd values, keeping these games afloat. And some of these games are reasonable games. I haven't played them myself, but I've talked enough about them and read enough about them to kind of like understand a little about them. Some of these phone games are actually pretty well designed. They actually have like decent amount of budget put in their audio and stuff like that. But all that's locked behind the grind to get you spending things on the cash shop. And it always just seems bizarre to me, because to me it's like the concept is, you make a good game, I pay you money, then I play the game, as opposed to I have to pay an insane amount of money nonstop to get little tiny bite-sized pieces of the game. But some of these people, they hit that point where they can't actually control their impulses, and they even consciously understand that they're just being had by these developers, and they're like, oh, well, I don't care at this point, I just want to get my tiny little bit of satisfaction.
Well, you mentioned that we would have to cover the broader topic of marketing in a much longer form situation where it would be over multiple podcasts. If you had to start in some place, where would you start for somebody who's just a player, who's just coming into, not really maybe super familiar with the history of games? Maybe they're a recent sort of inductee to the idea of playing video games, and they're trying to figure out what they
Well, the
like.
most basic is doctored screenshots. So the vast majority of screenshots, if not all the screenshots today on Steam, are doctored. There are games that you'll see anti-aliasing in the screenshots that does not actually exist, because the screenshot has been either taken out of something that's massively super sampled, well beyond what you normally would be able to obtain within reasonable hardware, and usually run through Photoshop and doctored. Not to mention, for example, if you looked at like the screenshots in Blizzard art, a lot of the screenshots are from previous builds. They're doctored. They're not even like actual screenshots of the game, etc., 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 etc. So the most basic fundamental level that you start seeing the screenshots in is the projection of what you get is different than what you actually get. So if you look at videos, I notice this a lot on Steam. Videos for games do not show you in-game interactions. They show you something they may have recorded with the game engine, but usually have done something to doctor that as well. And then a string of like quotes from shill websites like Kotaku or Game Informer or whatever the fuck ever that they bought out. And they're like, these people say this game is good, so this game's good. And then they don't actually show you any game. They don't show you the mashing of buttons. They don't show you the user interface. They don't show you all the actual stuff. And then when you look through the still screenshots, it'll be very much the same thing. You very, very rarely will find cases where they actually show you what the game experience is like. They try to flower it out. So what marketing is at the core level is to grab your interest and have you clicking around and doing things and give you the impulse to push buttons. Now, I'm not educated in marketing. I never went to school for marketing. I haven't talked to too many people who are actually doing commercial scale marketing. I've talked to plenty of like high level programmers. I've talked to people from Blizzard. I've talked to people in European industries. But all of what I understand from it is just by watching stuff and breaking it down. It's just by watching how information is presented. Because marketing isn't just about saying, hey, buy this. Here's this deal. Marketing is down to the pacing, the audio. Another very good layman's terms of how marketing works that I'm sure I brought up at least once before is you're watching television and an ad plays and the ad's volume is massively louder than everything else. It's all hyper compressed from loudness war. Loudness war plays into marketing too, by the way. is very, very similar. And actually, that brings you into a whole host of hilarious legal things where police stations have been sued in Europe because they were playing music on the radio and other people heard them. And so obviously, when you're watching TV and an ad plays is super loud, it forces you to go to your remote and turn down the volume. So even though that's a negative response,
It's still a response in
marketing,
the first place.
it's a response. Yeah, it's precisely it. It's a response. A response is a response. You know, that's why nobody goes to Kotaku. That's why you have archival websites that pulled up and people watch that, because people understand that if you go to Kotaku to yell at them, you know, whatever dumb SJW shit they're coming up with today, you gotta see it. It's unbelievable. But that's what they want. That's why they post these articles. In all likelihood, they don't genuinely believe in anything they post, but they know that people get really pissed off by it. You go there, you give them hits, ad revenue. It works for them. I mean, satire websites, you've got like The Onion and stuff like that. People who just post outrageous shit as comedy or whatever. And the whole thing is ad revenue empowers that, especially today. It wasn't so big of an issue yesterday, but it still was kind of an issue. You had magazines like Nintendo Power and stuff like that, that of course pushed advertisements and, you know, reviews and stuff. And it, at the layman's level, it's like, just look at your day-to-day interactions of what it is you're actually looking at. When you look at a game on something like Steam, you watch a trailer, it's like 1 to 2 minutes usually. You know, it's got all the bombastic trailer music. Trailer music all plays into marketing. That is an entire business in its own. That's why the copyright control for trailer music tends to be more aggressive than everything else, because the whole thing about trailer music is that if you hear the same track more than twice, you have a mental association with the original thing. The marketing isn't as powerful, so that's why they're more aggressive about trying to stop people from using it, which didn't really turn out to be that successful. But you know, the timing and everything like that, the images that it shows you, the way things move, you pay attention to the text on announcements and stuff that are played in there. The text is usually very brief. It usually has some kind of flowering about it. There's usually lots of shine. It's usually paired with a sound effect to create more impact. Things like backlighting. Backlighting characters and stuff to create more pop, to create focus center points. If there's a gameplay video, they usually try to pull your attention to one major thing and trying to keep you from paying attention to the actual entirety of the gameplay. Because the entire end goal of marketing is to save you money and time. If you can market a product that took you a quarter of the time to make as a product that's actually good, you can market that product better and sell that product, then it ultimately doesn't matter what the hell the product actually is.
So
You know,
for
as long
somebody
as you
who,
sell it.
right, so for somebody who's still coming into this and maybe dubious as to the stuff that we talk about, because there are those people do exist. They do come into the chat sometimes and say, you know, oh, I don't really see what you're saying. Maybe we can elaborate a little bit more on the first thing that you brought up after we started onto this particular topic was Kotaku and other game review websites, game news aggregates. So how would you, if I wanted to go and find a publication that, if I wanted to judge whether or not that they were, let's say I'm a new person, new to gaming, but I want to judge a game, and I see that the screenshots are doctored, or I know that maybe there's a chance that I can't trust those screenshots. But you know, my next logical thought might be, well, just like film reviewers, I'm gonna go see what game reviewers had to say on it.
Yeah.
How would you find instances of game reviewers who aren't shilling for something, either because they were paid or because they just don't have the standards that maybe fit the average person? How would you go and find a system where I can trust what I'm reading is an accurate representation of what I would be playing if I were playing the game?
So first, you look for someone who's not into it for profit. So you stay away from platforms like YouTube. You stay away from websites with advertisements on them. You stay away from anybody associated with a brand name, such as, for example, game trailers, Metacritic, stuff like that. You stay away from all that stuff. You stay away from people who use numbers. Now, for the average person, that's already going to isolate you from pretty much everything, because even I couldn't tell you of a person that I know to be a reliable game reviewer who actually publicates work. Most of them I know are private, because the thing about game reviews is almost every single person you're going to find doing a game review is a color opinionist at best. They find something that they liked for X reason, maybe it associated with an older game they enjoyed, maybe they liked some portion of it. They will review it from that viewpoint. They won't actually break down the game objectively. To actually review a product and look at it as a worthwhile investment of your money, you have to compare it to old products on an objective level, which means you have to break it down to technical stuff. And something you're immediately going to find when you start thinking in this way is that pretty much every single person who reviews games, like Total Biscuit or anybody at Kotaku or anybody at GameSpot, whatever, they don't understand the technical points of the games beyond just the absolute most basic of things, like, oh, this is a diffuse map and this is a normal map. They don't understand any of the actual processes it takes to make these things. So already the review is going to be somewhat inaccurate if they start trying to talk about things like budgets and whatever, because you have to be able to identify things like, what is this a commercial asset from? Is this a piece of middleware? What kind of software did the developer actually put into this? And a lot of these people are not there to critique something. There are people who build critical reviews for the sake of building color commentary. You have it both ways. Some people will say, I just am a dick and I yell at things because people like that about my personality. Some people like people who are more critical about things, but it goes both ways. I don't think you should be critical about something unless it is deserving of it, and you shouldn't be praising of something unless it is deserving of it. But at the same time, the way in which you express critique and praise should all be done as objectively as possible. And that can be difficult if you're not actually familiar with what you're looking for. For the average person, they're not going to be able to tell the difference. I have been told before that you can't even objectively critique something, that people don't even begin to understand how to actually break down a product. But the thing is that a game is a technical construct, start to finish. There's right and wrong ways of doing everything, from the story to the voice acting to the graphics and everything like that. So you have to be able to separate what is personal taste from what is actually a formula that you can express in a manner that allows you to actually compare two titles together. Like, for example, Brood War and StarCraft 2.
The issue is that a lot of people will say that a lot of art or media or whatever is subjective, and as a result of their appreciation of it being subjective, they have a hard time, I guess, accepting the idea that you should.
The thing is art review is actually very harsh.
Well, right, because the idea is that you use a technique to make this art, and as a result of using this technique...
The thing about art, and this is a distinction you should make right off the bat, the thing about art is a purpose-seeking expression. Art is something where an artist has something they need to express in some way. But every single game is an expression that is looking for a purpose. It's looking for a reason to exist, and it's going to try to come up with excuses to exist. So there's extremely few games that even approach a shadow of being able to be considered art, and virtually none within like the past 15, 20 years. For the simple fact is that the vast majority of games are inferior to older products. They don't produce the same kind of expression. They don't have the same kind of passion placed into them. There are games that have very, very high quality in various certain aspects that, when you look at them, you say, hey, somebody really put effort into this. This most certainly could have been art, But the thing is a game is a combination of constructs. You can't have one good part and several mediocre parts and suddenly say this is a good product. So for the average person, they're not going to be able to make that distinction for the simple fact that, for one, they're not trained to actually look at details, to actually assess things. People don't like being wrong about things. People don't like, having liked something and then having someone turn around and say, this is bad. Their first reflex is going to be to go on the defensive and say, that's not bad, because they want to defend their investment in the title, be it time or currency. People don't like being say they made a bad decision in investing in this, or they're wrong because they like it. And that's a very natural reflex, but you have to accept that you're going to be wrong about some things. You're going to be wrong when attempting to review things, no matter how well educated you are, because you don't always have the full story behind something. But accepting that you're wrong about something and accepting that you can, understand why is the first step to starting to be able to look at things from a technical and objective viewpoint, and it will help you enjoy media much more as well. Because then you have to stop making excuses to force yourself to like something. Now you can actually look for things that are actually going to give you genuine experience. And it all plays into marketing, because marketing is designed to stop you from thinking. Marketing is very, very happy when you're not thinking, when you're just watching the flashing lights and shutting down your brain. That's why everything holds your hand. That's why everything flashes, is because they don't want you critically assessing stuff. That's bad. You know, critical assessment and foresights and analysis are the enemies of marketing. Marketing doesn't like that at all. That's why they keep it short, they keep it flash, they try to distract you as much as possible. That is the essence of the game, especially in the Western industry where games are viewed as toys. So you would notice, especially in older Japanese titles, that the marketing is very, very different. So here's another really great layman's terms I'm sure I've brought up before. Angry Kirby. So if you hop into Google right now and you look up Angry Kirby face or Angry Kid Icarus face or stuff like that, you're probably going to see some articles very much related to what I'm discussing. It's all about the marketing. So Japan produced Kirby and a bunch of other games, and they got localized to the West. Now, more formally known is the censorship that occurred therein. Bizarrely enough, America actually would censor a lot of religious references. For example, Earthbound got censored quite a bit. America would also censor anything that showed skin, for example, in Final Fantasy VI. America would also hire complete incompetent retards to do localizations and not care about what they were doing, creating a massive clusterfuck like what happened to Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII.
Right. Well,
But America
just
did
entire
other things
plot lines
too.
end up being completely different, is my understanding.
It, like, characters and everything become completely nonsensical. So the other thing that Americans do, however, is they realize, you know, the culture for Japan was very different at that time. People are more into like the cutesy stuff, you know, the chibi stuff, the cute faces, the smiles, you know, more like positive attitude things. And the funny thing is a lot of these Japanese games that have like these very outwardly cute, kind of inviting expressions to them are really, really merciless games. And they will actually end up destroying you if you're not accustomed to the titles. Even a lot of like the simpler, like more youth-oriented titles can actually be very, very difficult games. Americans don't like that either. So what they would actually do to the art to appeal more to the crowd in the West is make things angrier and edgier. So Kirby, for example, his smile would turn into a frown or something like that. Kid Icarus as well. And Courier Crisis, the comparison that I had seen was, you know, the Japanese original title just has like a two-tone background with a bike on it. And the American version has a 3D render of a guy mid-punch with someone, and you got the dynamic camera angle. A word you're going to see a lot is dynamic. And so you've played lots of League of Legends. You're well aware of the changes they made over time to the loading screens for the characters. They had the original ones, which were obviously very, very low quality, kind of Blizzard tier, deviant art stuff. And then they hit like the middle range, midway through, where you had like the Aria load screen. I think was actually probably one of my favorites because, you know, it had just the right balance in it. So now you entered the newer ones now where they have a lot of post-processing going on. Lens flares are a big one. The bloom, the sharper contrasts. And the characters are always like midway through some impossible action that's like, they're like a contortionist. Their body is in some very weird pose. And it's all about creating dynamic and expression. It's trying to be more catchy to force you to try to figure out what exactly it is they're doing in that pose. So it's very kind of jarring, not only to compare these to the newer assets, which is why they've been constantly replacing them, but it's also jarring in general because when you flip through stuff in the load screen and you see these for about 30, 40 seconds, most of them are entirely nonsensical. And they also become a lot busier. So when you turn those into unit icons, it is very, very hard at a glance to tell what they are unless you've been playing the game for a while and seen those and been exposed to them for a while.
Yeah, well, they also recently made skin splash screens part of the unit icons, so whatever skin you have equipped is actually the unit icon that they have, which further complicates this exact issue. I guess the thing about League, though, is that, I mean, there's just so many things. I never really considered the splash screens as an important element because there are so many other things that are so... in my view, fundamentally wrong, but they are marketing for the champion on a base level. It's like screenshots, I guess, in the same way for a new game, except most of it this way: buy it with money.
In the League of Legends store, do you have a preview for what a skin looks like in game?
No, you just have the actual skin.
You don't. You have the splash screen, and that's it. This is not difficult technology to make. they have those video previews for how abilities work. In fact, they've had video previews since I played that game all the way back when it like first came out, or at least like soon after it first came out. They have video previews for the summoner spells and stuff like that. Making something for skins just to show even a rotating model, that's like 2 minutes of work. That's actually really, really simple. And that's the thing about a lot of this stuff. It is very intentionally not done. Because for most people are impulse buyers who are going to be investing a lot of money into skins. And Riot is well aware of that. They also know that some of these people who are impulse buyers do have some kind of quality standards to them, where they might second guess something. And every step between an impulse buyer and pressing the buy button is a step where they may second guess their decision. And I find it actually really, really hysterical that nobody has really heavily pressured them. Or at least if they have, it's never brought to the public spotlight. Probably because people see them as detractors that are attacking the game company and they need to be silenced. That's kind of a response you get whenever anybody is remotely critical about anything. And yet, you are spending upwards of $30 on something whose only true value is in the game. So it makes sense to anybody who looks at it from an outside perspective that you should have a preview for what this looks like. Notwithstanding the fact you're paying $30 for what amounts to like a weekend of work, at best, for one person. But most people don't see it that way. They see it as, oh, that's pretty, or that's cute. I want that. So if you have something that actually shows you stuff beyond the splash screen, which is really where all the development energy goes into, then they're going to think, oh, that doesn't really look like the splash screen. Or, there's no like custom particles or sound or stuff. Like anything that stops you, that gives you the chance, the stopgap to think, is going to counteract the entire plan. So while the layman may have a hard time getting into the prospect that they're being manipulated in terms of psychology, and they might really be aggressive in their defense otherwise, the fact is that it's everywhere all around you. And the whole thing about marketing and psychology and stuff like that is to be subtle and to put impulses in your brain that you think you're putting there in yourself. And it's always targeted at people who have very, very little self-control, who have too much money to spend, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are precisely the kind of people who are going to defend it. So, on one hand, I can sympathize with people who try to defend that in some way, but on the other hand, it's absolutely absurd. And the reason why this disgusting, toxic practice continues is because of these people.
Well, I'm trying to think if there's anything else we can unpack in that particular conversation about things like League of Legends skins, or something in the same sense.
Well, we already brought up loot boxes and how they've done quite a bit of effort to try to push other things into loot boxes and like stealth nerf your ability to farm them.
Right. I mean,
because before you got keys from getting honor at the end of the game, and then they changed that you needed honor levels, and then it kind of became sort of more under the hood at that stage. They really don't like revealing this information because they know that no matter how well they boilerplate it, it can be gained. And
when China mandated that they released like these percentages, for example, for like what percentage of a chance you have to get a certain tier of skin, they did so very reluctantly.
Yeah. The thing is that the only reason that law hasn't been passed in America yet is because of the apologists, because of the liberals, who have somehow managed to delude themselves into thinking that paying $30 for one Warcraft 3 level asset is okay. Like that is just, it's absurd, but there are people like that, and it's crazy.
Well, for most people, that's a pretty big leap, is to jump from, people who are apologists for a game, and then people who are claiming that
they're the same vein of people, because they're generally people who will spend their money, they'll feel buyer's remorse, and they'll do anything they can to justify to themselves and others that choice was not made in error. People do not like being self-critical, and it's a far jump for some people who haven't really looked at it in this
right
way.
And that's what I'm trying to make it, so like unpack a lot of the stuff that we say, so that we even though we might sound crazy at first, people who are just coming into these concepts or unfamiliar, will still be able to glean something useful.
My goal is not to attack people.
Right.
My goal is to educate them. And it's going to come off as an attack, and I accept that. But my goal is ultimately to educate people and to open them up and to help them find ways to pursue quality content so that quality content will, hopefully be exposed to everybody at some stage. And this is one vein that I've made note of while playing League of Legends in groups of people of all different kinds of creeds, if you will. For example, I played with insane right-wing people, like extremely pro-Trump people, gun control, all the kind of insanity that people are very, very quick on the left side to point out as being like complete off the rocker, absolutely insane. But these people were quite calm and collective, and I played League with them. I played League with the Bible bumpers, and then I played League with the SJWs, and I played League with the more essentialists. I played League with all brands of kinds of people. And what you will find, of course, well, League's community is very, as they call it, toxic. It is a very hostile community. And this is really just because it's a competitive game, but it has cooperative elements in it. You're playing with people, and that drives the toxicity. Because League is comprised of a team of people, that gives you an easy way to blame other people for something that has happened and absolve yourself of responsibility. When you absolve of yourself of responsibility, you do not need to be self-critical. You do not need to be critical about any mistakes you made during the game, be they small, like just being slightly out of position or whatever. So what I noticed, of course, is always whenever a game is going well, usually people are pretty happy. Usually very few people will say anything, especially at a high level, because they all just kind of understand what to do and how to at least improve themselves, get their items, farm up, make moves on objectives and stuff. And even if something is kind of sloppily executed and people died or whatever, but you won the fight or took the dragon or took Baron, usually people are pretty amicable about that, even if they're the ones dying or whatever. But the second you start to lose, even if you're still quite far ahead within the game as a whole, the second you start to lose, people will very, very quickly become very angry. If people, especially in bottom lane, if people start making mistakes in bottom lane, you're going to start running into things like, I think you should have done this, I think you should have done that, why did you do this, why did you do that? The manner pinging of the question mark, as you are probably well familiar.
That's my favorite.
Yeah.
I love doing that.
It's like the super passive-aggressive way to be like, what are you doing, you fucking idiot?
Right.
But the thing is especially in the higher levels, usually people had a very good reason from their perspective for doing what they were doing. But when it comes to losing the game, it's always going to turn into a huge shit show of people blaming each other for their loss. And everybody has their own perfect idea of how they should have done things. And in an even skill situation, generally it came down to the fact that they didn't synergize together. Generally it came down to sort of circumstantial stuff. But the net result is people always leave that game incredibly angry, but they divert that anger to the responsibility of other people. My team was shit. I'm stuck in elo hell. Their team was better, so on and so forth. I've heard those excuses countless times, and I'm sure you have.
Right.
It's very, very similar to things like buyer's remorse and apologism.
Right. I mean, people in single or 1v1 games will still do the same thing.
Oh yeah, they'll still do the same thing. What you'll see even more often is balance.
Right. What they'll say is, because the idea is that you're projecting the fault of your own misplays or poor performance. You're projecting that onto, the fault of a game that basically allowed you to misplay in the first place.
It's like, I played perfectly, but zealots are imbalanced, so it doesn't matter how good I play, I'm still going to lose, and, you leave the game feeling like shit, and usually you re-queue again anyways, right? I was in this Discord, and then other time, beyond that TeamSpeak, this guy freaking uninstalled League of Legends like a dozen times, and it was always because of, this shit's imbalanced. Everybody who plays this game as a retard, he comes back within a week, and it's just the same cycle over and over and over and over and over again. Because he gets hooked into the game psychologically and, wants to play it, but every single time something happens that the game ends badly, he has to construe it as being some tremendous failure on behalf of somebody else. He has to balloon that out of proportion and get really, really emotionally engaged with it. And that is why so many of these people are incredibly angry all the time. That's why League has a reputation for having a shitty community. And it plays into psychology because if you make a mistake, you know, you feel embarrassed. You don't want to have to fess up to that, especially when you're in a group of people. You know, you don't want other people calling you out. You usually don't want to get into the situation where you're being made the enemy. But it doesn't really have to be that way because generally speaking, most people in League are playing it to improve to get better at it, right? Also, I have to go AFK now.
All right.
So I'll elaborate more on this later or whatever else it is you're talking about. I'll be about 10 minutes or so. So here's another very layman's example of marketing. You guys are all familiar with the hilarious political atmosphere of the West in this day and age. You've got the Trump, the man himself, the hero of this universe with his tiny little hands. And then you've got the very small minority who very, very much hate him because he's a racist and he's a Klanman and all this other shit. Now you got Canada. So Canada has what is called a prime cuck. He's basically the president. And prior to God King Trump's reign, Canada was ruled by what is known as a conservative. And they're insane. They're like actually literally insane. So they're kind of like the Trump equivalent, except even more Bible heavy. So everybody hated the conservatives. They hated them. And they would do anything to get rid of them. So walk in Justin Trudeau, the prime cuck. And the prime cuck and all his group and the conservatives and stuff like that, when you have like these public polls about what they're going to do about technology and stuff, they're very, very much in favor of censoring it and attacking anybody that speaks out against their ideals. Canada has a lot of actually really insane shit. It's kind of off tangent, but we have stuff like the cyberbullying law and people's hentai being detained from the border, stuff like that. So basically, we're like a nanny state. So, but this is the thing. People hated the conservatives so much, they wanted anything besides conservatives. The conservatives they got smashed. It was between the Democrats and the Liberals, and the Liberals won. So Justin Trudeau is a complete incompetent retard, and he's just doing nothing but shitting all over the country and making an ass of himself. But he has something really in his favor. Donald Trump. Donald Trump gathers this crowd of people who either adore him or hate him, or people who adored him until they realized he was just yet another puppet for, money. But the thing is that Donald Trump does X thing, it generates an uproar. So Justin Trudeau realizes, hey, I can do the opposite that he does and market that, and people are going to fucking love me. People are going to talk about me everywhere. People are going to be asking to shake my hand and sign my deals and all this other shit. So that's what he does, and he gains power by doing that. Because he's a marketer. He's a businessman. And Trump is too, of course. But Trump is also, he's got like that white lash in a way. He's a wild card. He's a very silly man. But Justin Trudeau is very much I would say he's a stronger, more savvy businessman in the extent that all he basically does is the reverse of what Trump does. And he constantly cries about gender equality. He's actually preying upon the SJWs and turning them into a marketing billboard. And he basically generates this victimization echo chamber that never exists and says, you're being victimized. We got to do something about you being victimized. It's not great that you're being oppressed. So now we have these things where he interrupts public speeches to tell people that it's not called mankind, it's called people kind, and all this other absurd shit he just comes up with on the spot because he's wrong, but he makes an uproar about it. He gets people talking about it. It's marketing. And politics is all marketing. It's why I fucking hate politics. It's why when everybody starts talking about politics, I get disgusted because I'm reminded about how fucking shit-brained my country is. And then people praise him. People praise him because he's so progressive when he's just monetizing their complete and total disregard for their own self-value. These people crave attention. So anything that makes them feel like that they're getting attention, that they're being praised, they want to sign up with it. And that's what you'll encounter a lot with games and marketing as well. It's all about auto-filleting. They just love that shit. And Blizzard is really into that. Blizzard is really into auto-filleting themselves. It's just actually kind of absurd. Like, they open up this BlizzCon talk about overweight, about how they're perfectionists, and they like to be known for Blizzard quality. Like, nobody fucking believes that. No casual believes that. No apologist believes that. No one believes that. Blizzard hasn't released a polished product in years and years and years and years and years, and everybody knows that. But they don't really care about that either. But Blizzard has gone so far they've actually diluted themselves because nobody has stepped up to say, you're not doing very well. This is a slapstick mess. Because people who play their stuff, you're not going to be able to change their minds. This is the thing. Once you get into that set, it's a lot like the religious people. You say God isn't real. All that does is reaffirm their beliefs. It makes them believe stronger because they've been taught that, Satan's armies are going to come and say God isn't real. They're going to turn you away from the voice of God. So in reaffirming your belief that God is real, you become stronger, come closer to God. You become more of a believer, more faithful, and you're going to get rewarded in the afterlife for doing so. There's a lot of the stem of that where it's in part very communal, but also very, very selfish. And that once you absolve a lot of things, once these people get slighted in a way that actually affects them and how their projection feels, they will turn on these things in an instant. They'll very, very turn on things. For example, Trudeau's making an utter ass of himself everywhere when it comes to foreign relations. And all these other people that have been watching him are like, holy shit, this guy's actually just... He's getting a gaff out of all of us. And then they start looking back at how he's been treating women, how he's just been shitting all over everything. And they're like, wow, this guy's always been a scumbag. But they didn't have to think about that way from the beginning because he was just speaking on their behalf, as they projected it.
The voice of an underwear model.
You'll see that a lot when you look at the descriptions for games and stuff, the auto-fillating, where there isn't really a discussion about how things are actually played or whether or just you can do this, you can do that. There isn't really like elaboration on a lot of these things because you'll find it always turns into something really monotonous and toxic because the game is ultimately just designed to waste your time.
Well, I feel like probably the most important element that newcomers can take away from marketing is that while it is supposed to grab you in and deceive you in some way, or at least occupy your time in a way that wouldn't be super beneficial to your particular budget, since it's not really, it is being deceptive. It's doctoring screenshots. It's misrepresenting your experience through game reviews that don't actually reflect the final product. It's all of these things, but you can also use it as a bit of a buyer's guide. And if we wanted to try and design a buyer's guide in that sense for people, it would be possible to do that, despite the fact that there exists out there so much information or misinformation in the...
That's precisely why I tell you to avoid sites like YouTube and Kotaku. Because the kind of people who are going to be pushing their content to those stages, they've already made clear where their values are. Because, believe it or not, a review is a product. And the marketing for that is generally a brand name or a color personality. And they're marketing their product, and the review is the product because you may not be paying for it. You're giving them hits, you're giving them ad revenue, you're giving them attention, you're bringing them up in the partner services for Google or stuff like that. They'll show up more in recommendation feeds, the more subs they have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's all plays into their marketing and stuff like that. That's where their value is. They're making content with the end goal of getting paid for it. So they're, right off the bat, they have much greater vested interest in pushing themselves to being more popular, to aligning with a more popular opinion, which is always going to be apologistic, rather than being critical about something. So in very much the same vein that you're saying, just looking at reviews, that's why I say pay attention to the platform that these things are being distributed on, because that says a lot about the kind of people that are making the content.
And, well, most people will look at YouTube videos and think, well, this is an innocent medium for dispersing one's views. So many people use it, even though people do get monetized if they do have a certain number of views. It goes a long way when, I actually just watched a game review by a channel called Racevic, and this guy went through an older game, and this is basically what he does. He doesn't really discuss many newer games. And that's, I think, another probably good way to know, or to at least start off on a good faith basis. When somebody's discussing a game that is older, it's unlikely to generate the same amount of reactions as discussing a newer game that's still being thrust in public eye, and people are still trying to make up their mind about it, whether or not they should play it, how often they should play it, does it deserve their money for microtransactions. You know, he's just talking about something like Max Payne. I mean, people are probably... It would be really weird if he was shilling for a game this late into its lifespan when it's not in the public eye at all, and he's trying to do something of a retrospective on it. So I think for games like that, that's a good useful basis, at least in my mind, is the idea that depending on how old the product that is being reviewed actually is, it lessens the chance that the review itself is nothing but a product, as opposed to a product with actual expression and not something actually useful to say. But there's still, I mean, again, people are hard pressed, I guess, to find current content that has useful reviews. So current
that's why I
games that have
prefer
useful
people to
reviews.
get thinking themselves, because I think YouTube and gameplay videos and streams like that are useful for building your opinion on, because you can just watch someone playing through the game and put your own 2 and 2 together. The whole idea is to prevent people from relying on somebody else's opinion. It may be a correct opinion, it may be a good review, but the whole goal is to just avoid people from relying on others. Now, this goes with the thing that I prefer a medium of word of mouth, because generally speaking, if you're like really close to someone, you really value their opinions on something, and you have a good understanding of where those opinions come from and why they may reach those conclusions. Now, contrary to the belief of many people, and I know Total Biscuit made a lot of people very angry when he said this, watching somebody on YouTube doesn't mean you know them. It doesn't mean you have no idea who they are. You know nothing about them. Doesn't matter how many videos you've watched, you don't know them. So that doesn't work. But the thing is you get people thinking themselves, then their opinions are likely to be much more honest. Once they start actually breaking things down and comparing it to previous experiences they've had, empowering people to think for themselves is the first step to then being able to reflect on third-party media more accurately.
And the idea that people would be thinking for themselves while using somebody else's gameplay videos as a conduit. I mean, I guess the issue is that a lot of people who are coming into the space are used to looking at reviews of critics for other media. You know, you think of films, books. There are these people who have built the industries that are built around having a professional elite of reviewers who create these
The
reviews.
automotive industry was brought to my attention in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of physical, not like commercial. There are physical commercial assets like automobiles that I'm sure have similar parallels, where you have, people who are trying to shop for something expensive, like a watch or a car or even a house, I suppose, and they're looking at the architecture style or something. There's probably a lot of people that are like in those sort of situations where they are used to seeking out expert opinions on the topic, and that's the key thing, is that you don't really have experts in the games industry scene. You would have to have another game developer review a game, and even then, it's depending on how similar the two games are. Does he really know what he was, what he's talking about? Depending on what that game developer's actual role in the company and in the development of his own game was, will he really know what he's talking about? When I go through and I look at these campaigns or these games that I'm playing, and I try to impart my own personal views on them, it is obviously coming from my own personal biases, my own personal ideas of what a fun game is, and that will color the review. So at the end of the day, it is more cathartic for me if people just look at that and say, oh, I'm sorry, there's a spinning man on my screen and I'm getting distracted. I think that it's more cathartic for me if people just look at my content and they see where I'm coming from, and then they're able to make up their own mind based on that. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to start this podcast series in the first place, was because I noticed that there was a distinct lack of views that were explained in any capacity similar to what we talk about on a pretty regular basis in my Discord server, about how, a lot of people just haven't come to our conclusions yet. And I wanted to know why that was. And there's the off chance that I don't personally put a lot of stock in, but there is the off chance that our views are simply completely misplaced and completely wrong, which I would like to know if that were the case. But on the more likely chance that our views are correct and most people just haven't come to them for their own reasons, I want to know why they haven't come to them, and I want to give them a sort of a roadmap, not to just be complete, like, spouting off the same stuff that I spout off, because like you referenced earlier, blindly doing anything, reciting anything for praising a game blindly, or critiquing a game blindly, or hating on a game. Doing anything blindly is not the ideal outcome, but the whole point of this podcast, for me anyways, is the idea that people will be able to see views that contradict what they initially believe, and then think, okay, well, why did I initially believe this, and has my mind been changed, essentially? And I guess you mentioned that a lot of people will be very loath to actually change their minds. And maybe that effort, as a result, will be somewhat wasted. But I don't know. I'm hopeful, anyways, that people will become more open to the ideas that we end up talking about in this podcast. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk about marketing, since it's so intrinsic. It's something that affects you before you even start playing the game. It's something that really does impact you, or has some sort of an impact, or some sort of an I don't know, impact is probably just the best word for it. That it impacts your decision to buy or not buy a game, and figuring out what the mechanisms at work are, and defining those things so that you are better equipped to sort out the impulses that are being elicited by the marketing and the ideas that you yourself have over them. Ultimately, it comes down to you yourself as a consumer becoming more educated. And I guess that's basically what we've been able to go so far with these ideas. You know, we've discussed the bullshot screenshots that are all doctored. We've discussed the game reviewers, or game reviews that don't seem to be consistent with other people's experiences, which surely happen in other media as well. You know, obviously this Black Panther movie that just came out is a big example of film reviewers who are saying, you know, oh, it's got a perfect score, and sort of virtue signaling about how the movie was good, completely disregarding any artistically based criticism of the film as racism, actually, which was hilarious to me. But you know, there are examples of this kind of behavior in other media, but it's not quite as widespread. It's not to say that games, you know, people who disregard games or have a critique of games are branded as racist by the community. It's more so that their views are just discounted.
Much worse than that.
Yeah, if you don't like a game and you're around a bunch of people who do like a game, typically your views are just branded as something that are to be discounted. You know what I mean? It's not really quite as politicized, I guess, or maybe it is in many ways. But in my experience, it's mostly been the idea that, if you're a contrarian in that sense, where you have a contrary opinion, a lot of people will boil it down to its base elements instead of trying to find a reason why you believe the way you do, and trying to map that out in a meaningful way.
Well, to me, I know there isn't really too many flaws in my observations. There's better ways of granulating them. Sometimes I conduct research and I come back and I reanalyze things and I learn new things. What I'm doing and breaking down things, I know that to be in large part correct. I pull a lot of information from people who have experience in the games industry, who have direct ties to people in the games industry, people who work at a very, very high level for quite a few things, not just graphics, but like programming and stuff as well. So sometimes they step in and they make corrections for me. There was a comment I made in Diablo 3 about data storage related to text files, and someone stepped in and said, hey, no, this would be better than what you said, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, sometimes mistakes like that are made. And the thing is though, the way I word out my stuff, I hold no illusions that I'm going to be able to change anyone's mind in the simple breadth of a podcast. Like, I have a community that follows my work, and I have no intentions of ever branching out from that. And one of the reasons I don't intend to branch from out to that is because to really understand why I reach a lot of conclusions, to why I discuss about the things I do, you have to really start from the beginning. You have to see everything. Because when I go through one game and I talk about the content of one game, very rarely is that enough time to really get into the thick of everything related. Like when I talk about action RPGs like God of War and Darksiders 2 and Dante's Inferno and Demon Souls and all this other shit, there's a reason why I've reached all the conclusions that I have with my experiences with Dark Souls, and that's spread across most of their franchise and all the other titles that they ripped off of, including like Symphony of the Night and stuff. So to even really begin to see all those conclusions in motion and to understand the breadth of what I was saying, you have to get into like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours worth of related video, and like 99% of people aren't going to do that, and I'm quite all right with that. Like I'm not going to try to convince anybody of anything. I don't think I have the power to convince anybody of anything who isn't already open to critical thinking themselves. I like to project things in a way that I can open people up to the prospect of critical thinking and say, hey, maybe you should start thinking about this. Maybe not necessarily you're wrong, but maybe you're viewing things a different way. And as long as I can get people on that road and start looking at stuff more critically in general, then I'm pretty content with that. I'm not expecting to walk in and say, hey, all your views are wrong and this is right, and have them say, oh, wow, you're real smart, I'm going to get in on this, because that's delusional.
Right.
There's no way anyone is going to think that way. It's like anytime I've ever tried to argue about anybody with politics or religion, I just immediately stop and say, no, this conversation is retarded, you're retarded, I'm done. And I just leave it at that, because the conversations are utterly futile. When have you ever converted anybody to any religion or anything over talking over the internet? You can't. That's why I tell people to think for themselves and review for themselves, because when you experience things and think for things for yourself, when you start actually critically assessing what you're doing, then you're walking down the path I walked down in. I used to be a huge Blizzard fanboy. I used to be a huge Valve fanboy. I used to, really argue in favor of these titles. And then I started doing critical thinking, and then I started like actually assessing what I was doing, especially when I got into modding and stuff. And you're going to find most modders, even like the really, really apologistic ones, most of these modders are still like super critical people. Even if they're not like really skilled and don't really have like a super strong kind of like understanding of what's going on, you're going to find they're going to be much more opening to looking at the ridiculous things that developers are doing and saying, hey, that's really stupid. Because they have some degree of exposure to that already. They know kind of like the level of effort and energy that goes into things. And something I was actually thinking while you were talking about watching reviews is there is actually one source of reviews that kind of opened my eye up to critically thinking, and that was actually Top Gear. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Top Gear.
I'm not personally.
So Top Gear was a British television show that had I think 3 or so commentators on it, and the premise of the show is they review cars. They talk about cars, and they have lots of really entertaining like little games and stuff, like celebrity in a reasonably priced car or whatever like that, and then things like a car racing a Harrier jet and stuff like that. But they also like talk about the cars, like they review the cars. And I hadn't really thought of this too much until Wybob brought it up to me before, that the automotive industry is actually, the reviews for that are actually pretty cutthroat. They're pretty serious. So when I thought about it, I thought, I was never really into cars because I don't really possess money. I don't own a vehicle. I'm a technically minded person, and some of the subjects really interest me how they work, but I've never actually like been a car buff. I've never really been into automotive stuff. I've never read magazines or really watched things about it. But Top Gear was a very entertaining show to watch, and the casters were really good. But it's still ultimately about vehicles, and you learn stuff about them. And the way they reviewed things a lot of the time was pretty critical. And they would talk about a lot of things that I definitely wouldn't even think of when looking at an automobile. Like when I look at an automobile, I would think of like, oh, okay, how does it look? How comfortable is it to sit in? Kind of like superficial stuff like that. How does it perform? How well is the gas mileage? Stuff like that. But they would really get into the thick of like how certain portions of the cars were working and handling certain things. And it's kind of like where I go through games. I have been exposing a lot of people I've talked to recently to the way I've been reviewing like World of Warcraft and stuff, and they tell me like the exact same thing. Like, knows all these details I've never seen, and to me it's like, this shit's right in front of you. How do you not see it?
Right.
Because you're just not accustomed to saying it. And once you actually see it, when it's actually really laid out, then everything kind of starts coming together over time. So, I'm not gonna try to make like a YouTube channel or something and be like, hey, this is how games really are, and get like 10 million views and make a face reveal video or something like that. But it's just if I can get you thinking about it and really like starting to ask those good questions, then that's good enough for me.
Well, it's interesting because I think we're all selectively either what's the term, sophisticated or blinded in a certain field. Like you were just talking about how cars, you were asking very simple questions about the quality of it, very superficial ones, and it's because you had a low knowledge base. And what it comes down to is you already had developed
no exposure.
Right. Well, you had already developed the critical thinking skills that would require you to even show an interest in quality in the first place. But the questions you were asking were, due to lack of exposure, just poor questions. Most people probably have the worst of both worlds, where it seems to me that most people aren't particularly critically inclined and also don't know what questions to ask. They really, when they're asking about a game, they ask, is it fun? And that's such a nebulous question that if I tell them no, I mean, I could be lying because I don't know what what they mean by fun. I don't know what
some people find fun out of watching Hearthstone tournaments. Like,
yeah, right.
I try not to talk about something as nebulous as that because you go down a dark road pretty quick when you start asking about what people's idea of fun is.
Right. Well, that's something that's pure. I mean, I would say it's purely subjective. You can maybe put a graph somewhere that shows like average levels of fun or average reactions of fun, and see that it's higher with some higher quality games, but it will also be higher with a lot of games that neither of us would consider particularly stunning, like Hearthstone.
The thing is, when I conduct a review or look at something, I'm never going to try to tell you if it's fun or not. Like, this is something I obviously faced with Demon Souls when I first assessed it, is I talked to several people who love these games, who swear by them. And in Dark Souls, one of them made me the guide for unlocking the DLC and stuff like that. And then, I made the video effectively for them. And you go into the review and you think, okay, so obviously a lot of people really like these games, but it's just not a good game. Like, but I can say it's not a good game, but I can't tell you can't have fun with it because that would just be plainly incorrect.
Right.
And you have to be able to make that compromise when you're making such observations because, you can't say something is not fun because people have obviously had fun with it. That's like irrefutable proof. And
well, yeah, I mean, the other thing,
think you should even approach. I think it's not even unnecessary to approach that when making a review of something.
It's certainly not, but a lot of the people, the point I was trying to make was that a lot of people who ask me about what I think of games, they always ask me if I think something is fun. They would recommend it based on how fun it is. And again, I was sort of just, I guess, making the point that it's a pretty difficult thing to actually track, and obviously is very subjective. But one of the other things, though, is that a lot of people will accuse anybody with a high bar of quality, a high set of standards, as not being capable of having fun or not enjoying stuff. I actually personally enjoy looking at a game and trying to dissect it, even if I don't actually enjoy the game itself. It's something that I find value in going back and playing these micro-only Brood War campaigns, and even though I absolutely despise actually the experience of playing them, the experience of reviewing them or trying to take them apart is incredibly gratifying because I'm looking at a piece of history, and I am able to try and tap into what the intention was and what people probably liked about it, and basically trying to explain that to some degree. And it's definitely not going to be fun for most people who would go into it because it's such a niche topic. But you could say the same thing about just playing a game that you don't find enjoyable to play, but you're playing it because you enjoy dissecting it. It's the same sort of concept, trying to figure out why people like what they like, and maybe what the intention of the developers actually was. But that's something that also ends up, I think, getting misrepresented a lot by marketing, is the intention of the developers. Because you get a lot of these instances where the publisher, which I don't even know why publishers still exist, that's a topic for its own podcast probably, is, you have these publishers who, again, they are probably the ones in charge of the budgeting. So when they go through the budget and they assign X for marketing and Y for actual development, X is almost always greater than Y, it would seem. I mean, I guess I shouldn't make that claim without having actual statistics to back it up, but it's more so
I have been told
an assumption.
StarCraft 2 had $100 million placed into marketing. I don't know if that's true or not. I would believe it, given that StarCraft 2 did stuff like putting advertisements up in PC banks, which I think was illegal, among so many other things. And obviously, I mean, just looking at StarCraft 2, you can't say that that game had any more than like a couple $100 in its budget, because the end product says, like, logically speaking, this is a very low quality project. Very, very low quality, had very, very little energy placed into it. Maybe they burned $100 million in development and only $20 million went into marketing. Without actually being in the staff, it can be hard to tell, because a lot of the times the numbers they project are also incorrect.
Well, yeah, and the bottom line is that even if they did use most of a budget on development, oftentimes it appears mismanaged, judging by the end product. And
Yep.
the fact that there are such a prevalent amount of marketing materials given out from like that are derived from games that seem to have such a poor or poorly managed budget for their actual development would illustrate that point. In general, I think that when you have a developer who has a certain intention when they come into a game and they're trying to, they have their own idea of what the game should look like or should feel like. The classic example was that Spec Ops: The Line game, which has been lauded as something of a something that bucks the trend of modern FPS games, or modern when it was released. And I haven't played it myself. It's on my to-do list, but I remember looking at the marketing for that particular title, and they marketed it as if it was a COD clone, as if it was identical, because they were still trying to maintain the facade that it was, in fact, just a typical FPS. But because they didn't actually hit on any of the elements of it that were unique, like the storytelling and whatever else people ended up acclaiming it for, they focused instead on the fact that it was an FPS and you were controlling some dude in the American army and fighting some people on foreign soil. And basically, I could have just been describing like hundreds of FPS titles that have been released and that were around that at that time when that game was released. So obviously, it was not particularly crazy or spectacular marketing, but it probably hurt the game, as opposed to if they marketed it as if it were what it actually was, which was trying to some sort of subversive storytelling, where they subvert your expectations, and in doing so, hopefully make you think a bit more critically about these games in the first place.
You enter a very weird and for developers a very dangerous kind of territory when you start talking about what you're advertising, because most people are scared of change, and that includes developers. If there is a trend, for example, in this case, it's Battle Royale before it was like zombies and shit. If there is a trend and you try to break that trend, you risk losing a lot of potential exposure, because that's what the fad is. It's called flavor of the month. And if everybody's fatting around Battle Royale because PUBG is such an in-depth and totally not randomly driven game at all, then if you are making a product and you advertise it as something that is not in that trend, chances are you're going to get overshadowed by that, even if what you made was actually a really good product. And there's plenty of games that have fallen in that regard, where they just, they didn't market it super well, or they didn't have enough exposure, or it just came down to how they market it. But at the same time, like you said, if you market it as something different than it actually is, then you run into, Hunt Down the Freeman, and so many other Steam titles, for example. Like I said, they don't show much of the game when they're marketing it. Then you're going to run the risk of, people realize you're actually just not really being entirely honest. But so many people are so apologistic that even as something entirely honest, they're going to try to come up with some excuse to legitimize their involvement with it to begin with. But that can turn out pretty badly for you as well, like No Man's Sky. I watched a video presentation, can't remember who it was. Someone made a video presentation about that. No commentary, just a compilation of their marketing material and then the post-release marketing material, so to say, or at least like with things like game reviews and stuff are actually saying about it. And even they were really, really hitting on that title. So, if review sites and stuff are tearing something apart, something is seriously wrong. For example, a developer didn't give them money. So,
yeah, wow.
Like even so, just looking at like the review material, and you know that this is a piece of shit too. Like this is why I say people gotta think for themselves. If you're watching a marketing material, chances are you can just tell by what you're looking at and how it's being worded if it's actually being really wholly honest or not. And for me, one of the biggest red flags that's going to prevent me from looking at a game on Steam is if I see them quoting review websites. Because people pay these people on a table that say, hey, say good things about us. And they say, okay. And then you quote them. And you say, hey, look, people are saying good things about our game, so it's good. And Steam will push you recommendations just because it's popular, just because it's positively reviewed. So,
well, there's that also. There's the new system of curators where
yeah.
you have people who are through Steam itself as part of the platform showing up underneath the title. You can scroll down
And you'll notice,
and find those.
have you used Steam recently, that they've changed it so that your main menu, unless you're using the website and something like uBlock Origin or some other like Grease Monkey script or something, if you're using the actual client, you look at a store, it puts those curators in front of the selling list, along with like the discovery and stuff like that. Like is the people are telling me that YouTube and Twitter and stuff, not in addition to things like shadow banning and all that, what they're doing is they're actually pre-sorting your subscriptions so that sometimes you're subscribed to content and won't even show up because they would rather push like recommendations and stuff, and it's all a part of like driving you into advertisement revenue. And that Steam is very much the same. Like the curator thing to me is just hysterical. It's absurd because
well, it's weird too because it's on two fronts. Because not only is it subverting any it's placed above user reviews, it's placed pretty like prominently there.
it's placed above like the new releases and the specials too. Like if I go on Steam, I only want to see the specials. I don't give a shit about anything else because none of the new releases are any good. I want to see if some old release has like a decent special on. But I gotta scroll down like 2 or 3 fucking pages worth of shit. That's just discover this. Look at all these curators. Like I don't think you can even remove that inside the client.
Probably not. I haven't had any success. But I don't know, man. The idea that you have that coupled with the fact that these curators are in some cases actual like game reviewers. Like I'm sure the Kotaku has a curator page
most of them
on Steam.
do.
So
I mean, it's a place to put your advertisements. So I think almost all the major outlets would have one there.
Yeah. So
that's actually a really funny thing. Now that you bring up Steam, is there's actually a character limit on game reviews, and it's not a very big one. So if you want to make a meaningful game review, you have to link it to something off the platform, which is absurd. Like that just boggles the mind. Because if I wanted to break down a game for you in a text format, like let's say Dark Souls or World of Warcraft, even superficial, like one day playing the game, if I was to break that down, I would end up like with a novel talking about all the technical shit to actually really get into what makes this product what it is. But Steam as a platform says, no, you can't do that. Short form everything, make it as small and concise as possible, which makes it as vague as possible as well.
Well, at that point, even the people who are critics of it can't be as critically. Well, they can't be as specific
no
with
one
their
can
criticisms.
be in depth. It's basically you can just say this is shit or this is good, and that's it.
Well, it has a weird habit of, I think, reinforcing that mindset of just saying what in common form is essentially an upvote or a downvote. It doesn't
that's
offer
entirely what it is, and all those are made entirely just to get upvotes too. That's the drive of the system. People make stuff just to get upvotes. They just want to see upvote numbers. And as that actually brings me back to something I wrote an article about a while ago on Mapster, is how somebody is like, people are so butthurt that I can't correctly review their stuff. Like, that's okay. That's honest. But the way in which he goes to justify it is hilarious. He says, if you like my product, just give it a like or don't say anything at all. And then he's going on about how he wanted just to be able to post. I think it was Dumb Ducky, actually, or Dumb Duckies or whatever the fuck his name was. He's like, I want to be able to post a critical review, and then someone later on the line can add to it. It's like basically a way of saying he wants to use a review just to spout something that he feels irked him, and then push the responsibility of actually explaining why it's a bad review onto some other imaginary person. Like, it's the worst kind of review imaginable. It's no better than just saying, oh, this is good, without actually giving any context as to why. Like, it goes on both sides of the fence, and Steam as a platform empowers that kind of bullshit.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that we've seen this microcosm of this kind of behavior where the marketing of, say, something like a Brood War or StarCraft 2 project, um, if you review it negatively, or if you have negative or even constructive things to say, a lot of the times you are not looked positively upon in that sense. And the same sort of thing happens on a much grander scale with regards to Steam, where people who disagree with you on a certain point, if they happen to share the point of view of the majority, then you won't see a whole lot of, well, you just won't see a whole lot of
You want
positive
interact
reception. Yeah.
because the way the upvote system is designed is to give you an opt out of interaction. That's the entire point of things like upvotes and donations and stuff, is they opt out of interaction. Like whether you disagree with a piece of material or agree with it, just by pushing the like button, it's a way of meeting that psychological OCD that says, "Ooh, I want to contribute to this. I want to say something, but I kind of don't want to put in the time to actually say something. So I can instead push this button. It gives me that same feels good about how, oh, I was a part of this conversation. I contributed without actually contributing." That's the entire purpose of the like system, is to basically destroy communication. And as a content developer, I find that really, really, really bad. Because even though my stuff is really, really, underground, so to say, I don't publicize anything, the amount of feedback I've gotten for it far exceeds like 15 years of modding across dozens of different games. Because the people who are interested in actually getting into the content, they're all people who understand that communication is actually a thing. I don't have comments on my site, and I never will. I don't have, a forum for that. I don't have anything specifically related to that stuff as well. People just, message me in an email or whatever, sometimes on Steam. And then you have like super long conversations about it. And communication is the driving force behind what leads to content, because a review needs to be more than just something saying, I had an experience with this. It was fun. In order for a review to actually review something, you have to get into why you had that experience. You have to get into what formulated that experience.
And that seems to run counter to a lot of people's, a lot of people's own design philosophies, I guess, if you will. There's very few people who, at least in my experience, again, one of the reasons why I even wanted to make this podcast in the first place was because that there were so few people who represented an actual critical viewpoint. And critical doesn't necessarily mean that you think everything is bad or that you think poorly of stuff. It's that you think of stuff. And unfortunately, when I say something like that, it comes across as very incendiary. A lot of people think, well, you're implying that I don't critically think, that I don't use critical thinking at all. And that's not really what I'm saying. It's more to the point that a lot of people will look at a product, and if they personally found enjoyment in it, they can't imagine a world where people don't like it. And if they do find out that that world exists, those people do exist, their response is not usually very positive. It's not just to, it would be one thing to say, okay, you disagree with what the views that I have, I'm just going to ignore that, and we'll just agree to disagree, and we won't interact. I don't really think that's a positive exchange, but it's not really a negative one either. I guess it's not changing something that is, in my view, negative, but it's not making it worse. There's a lot of people who will lash out at people who start to develop these critical assessments of things, and this will either drive those people apart, and suddenly you had friendships that you lost because you thought the wrong thing about something, like some piece of media or some piece of art, depending on what kind of medium we're talking about. But a lot of the times you'll just have people who were on the path to becoming a critical thinker and thinking critically about video games or about a particular media, and because they don't receive a positive reaffirmation immediately, that sort of goes out the window. Their friends all say, well, you're judging it too harshly, or you're
This brings me back to Canada. You heard about that person in Canada who is in a critical thinking. She was an assistant professor, or whatever, for a critical thinking class, and we talked about this before. I'm sure she posted that video about some guy who challenged the prospect of the absurdity of these pronoun obsessions, and she brought it up not because she believed in it, but because she wanted to show something about critical thinking, that there's other opinions about there.
Yeah, the Lindsay Shipperd
And
case, she actually disagreed with Jordan Peterson on the point that he was bringing up, but
yeah,
she presented
the
it
very fact
because
that she brought it up
right.
generated this massive response from the system that surrounded her, in which, they censored her, and this huge shit show came a result of it, because of the prospect of critical thinking, because it challenged views. And that's like on a level that like damages the education system in a fundamental way, and all the people that come from it.
Well, it ends up being pretty. I don't know. One of my favorite quotes from anything either of us have ever done, I think, is that idea that there's such a thing as incompetence that borders on malevolence. I forget which one of us said that, but
Maliciousness.
or maliciousness. Yeah, the idea that you have things that are things that are so bad that were done so poorly that it's almost like you have to be trying to do something bad in the world to bring about some sort of evil or some sort of, again, malevolence or maliciousness. And I'm not really sure how to best tie that into marketing, because you see the whole idea of people just trying to line their own pockets, which is, I think you should make money for, or you should be rewarded in some way for a product that you make commensurate to that product's value, and other people can decide that value based on whether or not they want to buy the product. But influencing it to the degree that people end up doing is really, really, that ends up being pretty negative, I think, because a lot of people will end up having these negative experiences, but because their money is already gone and they can't refund it, like you mentioned earlier with the Steam stuff, where Steam is the biggest platform for people to actually buy games and experience games. So now you've got this big platform that has these specific rules about how you're going to engage with these games, and you can, okay, well, after 2 hours, that's enough for you to make up your mind. So if you don't make up your mind within 2 hours, you can't get a refund. It's over. And okay, if you want to do that, that seems reasonable, maybe on face value, because some games are actually pretty short. Some game single player experiences, that's like half the game is 2 hours, like those Call of Duty games. Some of the most recent ones have had longer campaigns, from what I've been told. But I remember, Modern Warfare 2, I think it was, one of those games ended up having like a 6-hour campaign or a 4-hour campaign. And if you're not playing it for the multiplayer, then you're not going to be playing anything but the campaign. So if that's all you wanted out of it, then maybe you played through 2 hours and you realize it's not for you, and okay, you refund. But the fact that afterwards, games have now shifted to where you need more than 2 hours to reach a conclusion about whether or not you enjoy it. And just based on the amount of grind that is necessary in order to actually get through to any part of the game where you're actually playing the game. I mean, that's as damning as anything, I think. And, I think at that point you just get, you end up in a position where a lot of people end up looking at the games that they're playing, and then they can't return them, they can't refund them, they can't get their money back. And that's where the whole buyer's remorse thing, I think in its most destructive form, stems from. Because now these people feel burned because they don't actually like the game, but they just barely missed that 2-hour window, or they weren't aware of it, and they think that, well, I just got this game today and I played it for a few hours, and well, I didn't like it, so I'm going to return it, and then they find out they can't do it, whatever the case may be.
Well, look at League, too. It's like you invest however much money into skins or whatever, right?
Yeah, and then finally the developer changes the game sufficiently to the point where you no longer feel like it's fun for you to play, but you have all this investment. Do you really want to let all that money go to waste? That's something that didn't even really occur to me until just now that you brought it up. But it's certainly something that I think, had I been aware of, might have influenced me to play a couple more games, might have influenced me to stick around for maybe another season or something like that. Whereas I gave it up basically completely, without the the exception of trying to make a couple of videos with the content recently. I haven't played it in a year, and certainly didn't enjoy it when I did return. And that's the kind of thing is this investment. When we talk about buyer's remorse, it's more than just a talking point. It's more than just a buzzword. When you have an investment that you make and you decide, well, this is obviously you have a vested interest by making that investment, that you want this investment to be good. You want this investment to be worthwhile. You don't want it to look back and regret the investment. But people go too hard the other way, and they overcompensate. And they say, well, the game isn't that bad. This game that I bought with all my money isn't that bad. Or the skin that I bought with all my money, it's not that bad. It's it has its good parts. It it has its redeeming qualities. And that encourages people to overlook the negative qualities, I guess, of a particular product or a skin that they bought in the microtransaction Overwatch loot box store, or whatever the hell it is called now. So,
I still can't believe there are so many YouTube videos of people opening loot boxes. It's like the absurdity of the very concept of buying loot boxes in that game. Especially when you just get loot boxes just for playing the game. Like, if it's a game you legitimately enjoy, you're going to get loot boxes anyways, just from playing it. But people will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on that shit and then publicate it. And then the videos have hundreds of thousands of views. Like, it's surreal. It's like, it literally is like gazing into Alex Jones's vortex and seeing the apocalypse of the lizard people eating everyone.
The problem comes from the fact that they probably make money off of the videos to the point where they can pay for more than just the loot boxes.
That's
so
what
they
makes
turn
it
a
even
profit.
more absurd.
It's
not like just one guy binging and buying a bunch of loot boxes because he wants something from the game. It's someone buying the loot boxes to open it and people effectively giving him money to do so.
Yeah, other people are funding. Well, the thing is, it's advertiser money, so it's not even really. I guess some people probably have Patreons for.
You paid money in terms of bandwidth for it. Like in Canada, you have a bandwidth cap.
Oh yeah,
you
that's
spend
true.
some of your bandwidth cap going to this guy's shit and giving him a hit, just watching him open fucking loot boxes, like, is insane.
There's another thing to thank Canada for is bandwidth caps. They're coming to America.
I think America's had it for quite a while, actually.
Canada's
definitely pretty big on it.
It was illegal. Yeah. They had it for a year and then they had to remove it. But now with this net neutrality stuff, I guess they're not. It's not illegal anymore.
I heard that there was quite a few people in America who had it. It was much less common than Canada.
Well, yeah, a lot of people did have it, but what I had explained to me by playing with my dangalang, who is actually he had a bandwidth cap for a while, but he was mentioning that the reason why he doesn't have it anymore is partially because he yelled at their customer support and they upgraded him to business class or something, even though he just residential. But also partially because they just removed the entire idea of it, I guess. Mm-hmm. Maybe it still does exist in some capacities.
In Canada, a couple, maybe about like 6, 7, 8 years back, we did offer unlimited plans. They cost about $100 more than the sort of like baseline, so about $240 or so, $240 for 56K speeds, and then you can get unlimited bandwidth. So the very process of getting 56K with unlimited bandwidth would cost you anywhere from like $150 to $250. And of course, if you wanted to go up to actually having functional internet with unlimited speed, you were paying like an insane amount. Like right now, I am paying $110 a month. I get 3 Mbit upload. I have a 400 gig cap. Now, I go through 400 gigs in a hurry if I do anything like upload videos, for example. Dark Souls 3 was close to 100 gigs. So you throw that on top of, like, for example, if you wanted to watch streams, I think Americans use a service called Netflix that is video streaming. If I wanted to use something like that and pay for TV for some reason, that would chew your bandwidth in just a couple days. If I wanted to stream myself, which a lot of people ask me to do, but I'm never going to do. I wouldn't do it anyways, even if I had infinite bandwidth. But if I did, the internet, for one, isn't fast enough to do so. 2, I would chew my bandwidth really, really fast. And what happens when you chew your bandwidth is the ISP I'm with, Shaw, usually is pretty lenient about this, but the main concept is if you go over your cap, you get bumped up to the next thing for the rest of the month, and you get a fee. You get charged for that. So I would probably be charged somewhere like around $150 to $200 for going over the cap. And
that's not connected to the $110 you already pay. It would be $150, $200 extra.
That's basically like the total. Like your price would effectively get doubled. So it would be bad. But As far as I know, it's kind of like a gray area where they don't normally do that. But it's like something I wouldn't want to risk, because if I suddenly had to pay a $200 internet bill, like I'd be basically on the street, because that's how tight my budget is right now. And like the concept of that is absurd to me, because basically what happened is the main thing that led to this is that they sent an email to people and to the government, and they're like, the ISPs love this. They like caps because, for one, it means they don't have to upgrade their infrastructure. That's something that everybody hates doing. And the infrastructure in Canada is owned by the ISPs. It's not a government service. It's not a public service. It's owned by the ISPs. That's why the prices are so fucking high, because it's a duopoly. And they don't want to upgrade it. They were given a grant to update it from the government years ago. They pocketed it and turned it all into cocaine. They have never updated it. So they want to get out of that as much as possible. And as we slowly upgrade to kind of like middle world kind of technology, in some cases, the cost of the infrastructure in terms of how many people are actually using it is increasing dramatically. So what they do is they try to say, hey, we're going to run out of bandwidth, because bandwidth is like oil. You're going to run out. There's a finite amount. And people believed them. So people welcomed the bandwidth caps with open arms. And now it's everywhere. And we are actually in the best part of the country. The east side of the country is much worse. Much worse for service. Much worse for the costs. For example, Wybod he lives in Ontario, and he's moved to like 3 or 4 different areas in the past 10 years. He's never had a stable internet connection, no matter what. And he's paying not as much as I am, but similar, and his internet isn't even half as fast as mine. It's insane.
Well,
I remember that
enough
Netflix
listening
had said
of...
something about Canada's internet being worse than third world, being worse than Afghanistan.
That wouldn't surprise me. Enough listening of Wybot has left the server over and over again in the background of your videos has definitely taught me.
I know that. I know that Mexico has better internet than we do, and Mexico basically lives on like weed and child prostitution and crime or something. Like, Mexico just sounds like a real mess. But they have better internet than we do. They have better prices, better service.
I don't know enough about other countries to really say anything. I just know that in America we pay crazy amounts of money for service that I would barely qualify as actual service, but still sounds way better than what you have. I get 100.
They're both.
I get 100 down and like 10 up, and
How much do you pay?
probably like $300.
$300 a month?
Yeah, it's like it's because it's a package deal with the cable and everything else. I think if just for internet you wanted the same money, you would probably be paying close to 160, something like that.
Yeah, that's fucking crazy. But then you've got unlimited bandwidth.
Right, we don't have a bandwidth cap, so they're expensive. I mean, this is USD, not CAD, so it's like probably
it'd be like 200 something with tax in Canada for sure.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's pretty crazy to me that there are still instances of...
But that's the thing about America too, is you have a much larger populated area, and the service in some areas is really, really good. Like where Labyrinth is, their service is very good in California.
Yeah, well,
I
there's
can't
all
say
those...
about the quality of the actual ISPs themselves. I've heard legends about Cox and Comcast all being total trash, but like I would take them over the Canadian ISPs who are trying to get the government to let them take down any website they want without any court oversight whatsoever.
Well, that's sort of already... I guess that sort of thing already happened with the whole net neutrality.
That's coming.
repeal.
It's coming to America already. We're like one step away from you.
Yeah. It's really weird, though, because just the thought of, like... there wouldn't be any major website like Netflix or YouTube or fucking Gmail or whatever. Nobody would sign a package deal with these ISPs and say, I will be blocked on all other ISPs, but if you get Comcast or you get Time Warner Cable, you'll have access to me, and that's the only way you can have access to me. Nobody would do that, but they might slow the speed down. They might agree to, okay, I'll agree to slower speeds on this, and this ISP, but for all other...
I think what's going to happen is you're going to find a lot of websites like, as an example, like Mega will all, like the ISPs are going to make a deal where they all block them. because it eats
Oh,
bandwidth that people do this stuff,
yeah.
regardless of like legal implications or whatever. People are going to be like, hey, this uses bandwidth and we don't want to upgrade our infrastructure, so let's all like make this deal where we all block them. So no ISP will now enable you to support that. You as Americans are basically on the precipice of becoming China. We're also basically becoming China, but just for little different reasons. You're very, very close to establishing your own firewall of China. Just it's going to be government saying, hey, you can do this to the corporations, as opposed to government saying you must do this. So if you're an American, I really hope you are looking into some Russian VPNs, because Russia hates America. And I don't blame them one bit. And there's lots of decent, I think Torrent Freak had a review of some VPNs a while back. And VPNs are not required by law to reveal your information, but a lot of them will because they don't give a shit. You want to look for one who doesn't store your information and hopefully survive the next couple years until someone who's not insane becomes the president.
Well,
and remember when I said that these right-wing people were insane that I was talking to? They were in favor of this.
that's the thing, is I can't really find out I don't really know why some people look at something like net neutrality.
Because they fantasize about a free market where competition breeds higher quality. They completely disregard that it's all the underhanded bullshit that got us in this spot to begin with.
It doesn't. The thing about competition breeding higher quality is
like
it's true, but
it would be producing good games. But
yeah, well, it's true in a sense that it like that's one way you can achieve that, but you got to stop people from competing in the free market in a malevolent way, and that to me doesn't just include what's the term? It doesn't just include things like bullshot and all of this marketing stuff that's really sneaky and psychologically based, but the idea that you have developers who are jumping through hoops and publishers who are jumping through hoops to try and get their games designed in such a way where they do it as efficiently as possible with as little work as possible, but as much marketing as success as possible. That to me is obviously flies in the face of the idea that more competition will breed a better, like less regulation, I guess. Will breed
Again, this is another reason why politics is utterly insane. What do politics do when it's at election time? What do the leaders do? They slander each other as much as possible. They don't talk about why you want to vote for them. They talk about why you don't want to vote for the other guy. And it's just all shit talking, because that's what their marketing amounts to, is they're trying to make each other look bad, because that's what gets people's attention. People don't want to learn about how you're a great guy. They want to learn about how shitty the other guy is. That's what gets people talking, is outrage. That's why the news focuses on things like murders and car crashes. And there's nothing interesting happening in your area. They're just going to talk about some other place where some other person got shafted in some way, because that's what gets attention.
It's pretty.
It all comes together.
I guess the fact that so much of the world, I guess, is so used to this kind of cycle, like the 24/7 news cycle that they have going on, where they cover all sorts of stuff. And like you mentioned, most of it is pretty, I guess, negative. You know, it's designed to elicit a response as opposed to report on news.
This is a real world application. So my grandmother comes to me like a couple of years ago and is like, "Why has the world become so violent? Everyone's going insane. It's the end times." That's literally what she says. And it's like, it's not that the world is becoming more violent, that there's more bad things happening. It's that they're more publicated. They're more exposed to the spot eye, because that's what the news stations knows gets attention. So now it appears like everything is just turning into a massive shit show, when it's really just like some liberals screeching autistically on the side of the street, and the net mean of gangsters shooting each other up here and there, and people getting hung, and politics doing things, and the average scandal. It's like nothing has really changed. In fact, the world is like as at peace as it's ever been. But peace doesn't generate interest. Peace doesn't make for good news. So we gotta find things and focus on things that are outrageous, that really catch attention. And that brings me back to the whole thing about like Kotaku and stuff and all this pandering and focusing on these hot topics for a very vocal minority, because the vocalization is the key part.
Yeah, well, this thing is the fact that they're so vocal gives the idea that they are not the minority. And the fact that everything is publicized, if it's negative or outrageous in some way, gives the idea that it gives them power in a sense, because now these people who are a vocal minority are also over misrepresented in the public eye.
Well, obviously, all those things have their own agenda too that they're trying to push, but
yeah,
it's insane. I mean, games are like that too. A lot of games that try to push things, and it's just its own way of pandering. Blizzard is very much like that with Overweight and StarCraft 2 and Diablo 3. They just have this thing they're trying to pander to you. Sometimes it's kind of like a metaphysical thing, like a kind of a subtle thing where they're just trying to like dumb you down as much as possible. Because a lot of their games are used as platforms for experiments. Like World of Warcraft was used as an experimental platform for microtransactions. They wanted to see how much money they can make off of nothing. So they had the Celestial Steed, made like $2 million in a day or something like that. Lo and behold, StarCraft 2, Diablo 3, and then eventually the pinnacle of Overweight and Hearthstone became massive microtransaction platforms. And a lot of things in Diablo 2, especially later on, past Lord of Destruction, were used as experiments to see, what they could get away with World of Warcraft. And even for someone like me, like it can be hard to pick up on the subtleties. It really takes some analysis to really see these trends forming. And it's certainly beyond the vast majority of like the average person is not really going to look at things and see people introducing stuff, having some kind of, actually sinister end goal in mind for it. But it is there. And sometimes it's something really stupid, like we want to make things really progressive and make this socially accepting message because it's the hip topic these days. So we need to grab as much attention on social media by doing something like that. Or it's something more sinister, like what can we get away with? How much money can we actually make people pay? And as it turns out, quite a bit. So the shit's just everywhere. And like I said, with marketing and everything related, it gets into this huge topic immediately, and it actually gets to be really exhausting. It's awful. That's why I hate getting into politics. I hate getting into religion or anything like that, because it's all just dumb as fuck. Like with games, it's dumb as fuck. And that's why I think like there's no point in me trying to like go out there and talk about that stuff, because I think that anybody who already has an open enough mind is going to be looking for someone who does that, and then they'll find it. And like any work beyond that to me just feels like entirely pointless most of the time. Like it feels like talking to a wall.
Do you have any recommendations for people who are looking for content that is of this nature, that does try and force people to critically think and sort of promulgates that kind of idea?
Western stuff. Stay away from YouTube. Stay away from, because YouTube is run by liberals and apologists. YouTube is known for shadow banning and censoring and all that shit. Like regardless of the monetization aspect, that's just a toxic platform for freedom of speech. So you don't want to be involved with that. Stay away from anything where people stand to gain any kind of monetary gain. Stay away from people who ask for donations. Stay away from people who ask for Patreon. Stay away from people who ask for likes and subscriptions. Stay away from anything where it's more about the developer or the content developer pushing the content than it is about the actual content itself. You don't want somebody who's trying to make a name for themselves. You want somebody who's trying to make a message. Now, whether that message is critical or analytical or not, you're going to get more value out of a piece of media from someone who is actually invested into the piece of media than someone who's invested in turning the media into a bullet point for a resume of some nature, or trying to get some kind of monetary value out of it. Because the term that money corrupts is real. It's very real. The second you start doing something for money, it's no longer objective. You can no longer rely on it to be objective. So while there's plenty of people and plenty of content developers that I've watched content for, like Critical and Mr. Mediker and stuff like that, who I felt that they have produced good content, I know that they're doing it for money, and I see that trend, like I see the things that they're doing in their productions for that money, and that always brings it down for me. That means I only can really superficially enjoy it because I know that there are things that they're saying because that's what people like. That's the personality they like. And for me, I know that a lot of people watch my content just because of how angry I get. I tend to get very angry, and I don't censor myself whatsoever when I get at all, especially when I get angry. And there's a lot of people who watch that because a lot of videos on YouTube or whatever are doctored, and people don't actually really get that angry, and usually it's very, very forced. So a lot of people watch my stuff to get angry. A lot of people watch my stuff only for the reviews. They don't even watch the LPs. They just listen to the reviews because they've said it's like I'm like the only person who makes reviews like this. So I don't really have like a recommendation for that other than avoid people who are in it for money and posturing. And in that respect, I don't really have any place I can really direct you beyond that other than to stay away from stuff like YouTube and Twitch. I would recommend looking up sites like Vimeo or Nico Nico, sites that people are fleeing from YouTube towards because there will probably be content on there that is English speaking. And but really, at the heart of it, I would just tell people just to start thinking for themselves. I think that looking for somebody else to substitute your opinions with that you can then entrust to have the right decision, I think that's the lazy way out. I think that you need to be able to look at everything regardless of who's developing it and make your own kind of objective conclusions from that. And maybe you don't have the education, maybe you're not really a critical person, it doesn't really matter. Just start thinking for yourself. Break the conditioning, so to speak.
Well, I'd say that's as good a point as any to end on. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we call it quits?
Yes, I would like to wish Necron a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Necron.
Happy birthday, Necron.